Hello and welcome to Network Insights from Move Consulting. For those new to the series, Network Insights is your opportunity to listen in to some of our conversations with the amazing people who make up our network, and for them to share insights into their work in supporting people to be more physically active. Today's episode is going to focus on lessons learned through delivering exercise referral programs. So, without further ado, I'll hand over to Elaine to introduce today's guest.
Hello everyone, thank you for joining us. I am so pleased to have the amazing Jeannie Wyatt-Williams, who is currently, well, you're a lady of leisure now, aren't you? But up until literally and figuratively, up until a few months ago, she coordinated the National Exercise Referral Scheme in Wales. So welcome, Jeannie. It's really good to see you again. And Jeannie and I worked very closely with each other when we were setting up the scheme. But I will let you have a wee chat about your career history, because it's fascinating, and what you've been up to over your, dare I say, long career in exercise referral. Am I allowed to say that?
You are indeed, yes. Well, thank you for the invite to come and speak with you. Yes, it's been over 34 years when I first stepped out to be a fitness instructor, and very quickly realised that there were a population group coming to certain classes that could have benefited from doing something else. And hence we originally set up in Bridgend a self-referral group, if you like. We called it Revitalife because the aim was to revitalise them. And they came and did some work in the gym, and then they went in to do their aquafit, and then they went up to the leisure suite. And the beauty of that was we started with 6 ladies twice a week. And by the end of the month, I had a mixture of groups. I had about 15 people coming, and they wanted to do more than twice a week. And I mean, it progressed quite quickly because there was a demand. I was filling the pool, I was filling the gym at a time when the gym was relatively quiet. And it grew enormously. I was doing it 5 days a week in the end. And GPs, local GPs that used to come to my circuit class, because I taught a multitude of disciplines, asked the question, what are you doing to my patients? They don't want their pain relief, and they don't, their health was improving, their blood pressure was coming down, so medications were changing. So I invited them to come and see, to come down, have a look at what was going on in the gym and in the pool. And that led to 2 of the main practices asking if they could refer. And it coincided with the first exercise referral course coming on board. So as I'd done with all my other qualifications, I paid, I went along, got the qualification, and we set up exercise referral in Bridgend out of the leisure money. We didn't have any funding for this. It was something else, but we felt that it was something I was already doing, but it was now going to be more of a referral process and more formal. So that was the start, really. That went on for a couple of years. Lottery funding came round, and lots of areas got funding for that, but Bridgend didn't get any funding because we were already doing it. As Elaine knows, when this lottery funding was ending, that's when the calls went to Welsh Government to look for funding to continue their programmes. And that's when I got the visit, I got the call to come and see what I was doing, because I already had some local coordinators who'd had lottery funding and just didn't know where else to go. How was I doing it out of the leisure budget? How was I proving my worth? And I think that's the key, is to be able to evidence what you're doing is good practice, and people are getting really good outcomes. And those people then naturally bought into the leisure service. So the long and the short of it was National Exercise Referral Scheme. We had the funding for it. I thought it was a marvellous thing. I implemented the changes from the April, because we'd hoped to launch in the April 2006, and that was delayed because of various issues with publications more than anything else. But I was good to go and recruited as the first. And then very shortly, the evaluation team said this project needs a coordinator. And sometimes I think of it that I pulled a short straw, but I think it was a really good opportunity.
I hope not, because I always say you were probably the best appointment that I ever made in terms of any of the people I've ever recruited. And sorry to those other people I've recruited, you've been amazing as well.
On camera now.
I'm in trouble, aren't I? But it was because you'd been there and you'd got the T-shirt in a sense, so you knew exactly some of the challenges that people were going to face. And we'd started off with originally 6 areas, and then obviously grew to the full 22 over those years. Yeah. And embedding a randomized controlled trial in it was entertaining, as we know.
It was entertaining, and I think again the issue mainly was how you were presenting it to the health professionals. I very much went in with, this is a really positive move. We've got funding, whereas I'd only had myself and a part-time instructor before. I now had 3 instructors in Bridgend. It was woo. And I sold it as a very positive thing, and then in the end described. And of course, as you know, I have so many referrals, but each month we're going to select 20, and 10 of those won't take part in the programme. But in the grand scheme of things, that's a very small percentage of the people that I was receiving. And I don't think the other coordinator sold it quite like that.
No, I think it was very challenging for them, because in their mind they've been running exercise referral for a period of time. They only really saw their success stories, and what we were and what the health service was asking us was, well, how successful really is this, and what about the ones that didn't get there? And that's what we were there to capture as part of that. But we learned a lot from that process. Yes. And so from thinking back to those early days, and what's changed, what sort of things did you change as you went along? Because it was quite a fixed model we had to do because it was a randomized controlled trial. But when we had the learning, once we'd learned from that, we were able to adapt according to the learning we'd had. So I just wondered some of the things that you changed as you went through in terms of how it was operating.
Well, we tried to stick to the sort of the model, as you say, but there were things that came out of it that perhaps we needed to tweak. Not everyone was doing that 4-week check as thoroughly as they could, and for me, that 4-week check was one of the most important aspects, because if you can capture someone in those 4 weeks and really get that rapport with that person, they're going to stay with you through thick and thin. And I think it was missing the trick. They were just trying to get them all to 16 weeks. We got to get the 16 weeks data. And it wasn't, for me, data is really important, but the important thing is the connection first. To connect with that person, to understand that person, what do they really want, and then help them achieve that. Not just think, well, I want you to come to the gym twice a week and I need you to do it for 60. And I think that was the learning curve for me when I came into this role as well, because I just assumed that everyone was doing what I was doing. And it wasn't quite like that. And so it was a real learning curve, but the changes that we made, I suppose, along the way was making more provision for people, particularly those with a mental health issue. They weren't taking up the programme initially, and they were being sort of left behind, but devising those other modules to go with the level 4 qualifications. That allowed us more aspect to give more time to those people. So they might still be only having 16 weeks, but it could last over a 12 month. They drift in and they drift out, but you pick them up and you you carry on with them, because you have to allow people to be ready to move on to the next stage. So that was, and what we were finding, as you know, in the trial, we were getting people referred into the generic programme who weren't really mild, moderate at all. And it was the level 4 conditions. So, and the Minister for Health at the time, if you remember, wanted respiratory was her big thing because of the mining valleys. And the qualification didn't have accreditation. So it was working with Loughborough College to get that accreditation in so we could commission the training, because I wasn't allowed to commission the training with the budget unless it was an accredited course. So there were lots of learning for me along the way, but finding what was important to Welsh Government, what was the next thing that was coming on board, and making sure that the training was there to support that. Because the generic are your mild moderates, what I used to call, some of them were the worried well, that you just needed that bit of hand holding to get them through those early stages. And so one of the things we did implement to make room for some of the other referrals, because we were oversubscribed, was those people that were able to go into mainstream classes. We'd signpost out early at 4 weeks. We still have them back to do a 16-week consultation, but because there is a danger of losing someone if you're not offering them the right activity. But by being able to signpost them to spin or something like that that was more suitable for them, something they wanted to do, it actually kept more people in the programme. So the variety, we offered a lot more variety and included outdoor activities linked with other partners such as Coed Llew, Small Woods, Let's Walk Cymru, all of those groups we linked with to try and offer some appropriate activity. And I think that was it. We were quite restricted in what we could offer for the trial, but opening up, the opportunities for people was a huge thing. We saw a lot more referrals coming in.
Brilliant. And at the core of when we created it, we put behaviour change support for these individuals really, really strong and centred to that. So everybody had MI training, etc. Now there was a challenge, I know, from the evaluation of implementing that. How did you find that developed over time? What did you do to try and strengthen that component of it?
So, as you know, we had the training with John Bull. To support the coordinators, because I felt that the coordinators needed to have a similar kind of training to be able to roll that training down. But we also in-house, I had regular contact with coordinators, exercise professionals, and we would support them with just online reminders. We actually made them a little laminated card with opening questions, guiding questions as a reminder. So they had it with them when they did their consultations to remind them to use that. And as there was a turnover of exercise professionals, not all of them had the opportunity to do some of the brief interventions training that we did. I trained as a level 5 coach mentor, in that I then was enabled to support those new people coming on board, because behavioural change is still, I think, is always something that you can work on. I don't think you ever stop learning about that, because no two people are the same, and no type of behavioural change or motivation will actually suit you. You have to sort of have a load of tools in your backpack to come up with the right connection with that person. It's like a dance, isn't it?
Well, Elaine mentioned kind of what are the things that you've changed about the programme. To take a step back from there even, and for some that are watching, potentially they may not have a clear understanding. When we talk about an exercise referral scheme, what are the fundamentals that we are looking for within that scheme? What were the fundamental design characteristics, let's say, of NERS?
So with NERS, there is a formal agreement, a referral form set up for all of the conditions that the staff are qualified in. So a whole range. There's separate referral forms because the information we need is different. So that's the way in. Only can be completed by allied health professional, NHS registered. Then we also have an agreement of the roles and responsibilities of the health professional and the exercise professional. So it is the health professional's role to make sure that they meet the criteria to enter into NERS. So they're not sending us someone that doesn't fit the criteria. For our main role is to check the referral. We go through a health questionnaire. We do baseline measures on each individual that comes in. And then from those, the outcomes of that, and then the chat about what they like, what they dislike, what their aims are, what their current physical activity looks like, what does a normal day look like. So I would ask you, thank you for coming. How have you got here today? Did you find it easily? And then, once we've got over that and there's a preamble, I would ask them to describe a typical day for me, because if you ask someone how physically active they are, they overestimate. If you ask them to describe a day, then you're more likely to get a more accurate view of it. And so once you've got that, the referral form would come in, coordinator checks, goes to the most appropriate exercise professional. They invite the person in for the consultation goes ahead, and then they signpost them to the best activity, the most appropriate activity for them, but also something that the person feels they could enjoy. So we signpost them to one, they get an appointment to come into that. If they don't turn up, then it's important we contact them if they miss that first one. But ultimately, we get them to 4 weeks. There's a 4-week consultation. And I think that is still the important one. We see them throughout, but at 16 weeks, we revisit all of those baseline measures and repeat them. And we give them a copy so they can see where they've improved and ask them, the questions about what they'd like to achieve. And then there's sort of the signposting to what is appropriate for them. Many, I find, are buying into leisure services and getting a concessionary card, or they've got various offers for people who complete the NERS programme in Wales, or they go into mainstream classes, or some of them will go and do outdoor activities because they're free and they're on their doorstep. So there's a whole range of things that the coordinator will have in place as exit routes. And we try desperately to get them back at 52 weeks to revisit those measures. But we've done our job. They've been physically active and they don't really want to come back. Some agree to do a telephone consultation or a virtual one. Even since COVID was a bit of a nightmare when it first came, but it opened up so many opportunities for us with delivering and doing online assessments. That was a big learning curve. Lots of risk assessments completed for that.
So one thing that I really like about the sound of the way that the NERS programme designed, even though it was a good few years ago now, when at its point of inception, let's say, is those core characteristics of essentially getting the individual to the right activity to suit their needs. Absolutely. Is at the heart of the design of that programme. And in today's world, in inverted commas, the language has changed, i.e. when we hear exercise referral, through a lot of the work that myself and Elaine have done, people's minds jump back to that idea of a 16-week programme of exercise, and it's stood on a treadmill with an instructor next to you doing walking and ticking how breathless you get and things like that. But the reality is the design characteristics and the ethos behind NERS, or the National Exercise Referral Scheme, very much fits with today's thinking in relation to physical activity referral, isn't it, Elaine? It's kind of not to over egg the pudding here, but I'd fall into using that phrase of it's kind of ahead of its time in relation to where thinking is now at the moment.
Yeah.
So the lessons learned, Jeannie, from that journey are going to be hyper relevant today. I would imagine. So you've already touched on a couple of things that you've learned throughout it. But if I'm to pose, just as a point of debate more than anything, a common challenge that we hear a lot around exercise referral is the bureaucracy that sits around it. You mentioned there's a couple of checks in place. I really like the idea that there are different referral forms to understand the needs of the individual, but that's a common thing that comes up quite a lot. That PAR-Q became a bit of a barrier versus an enabler. So what did you either do differently, or did you learn anything from that? Did you have similar challenges? Is there anything there that you share?
Well, we have learned. We have the referral forms, and it used to be the coordinator had them and emailed them to the health professional. So they wanted easier access. And for me, if there was a change required on the referral form, I had to make sure that everyone had the change and was sending it to the right person. So we developed an online portal for health practitioners to access the referral forms. And it was easier. Although it was challenging in some areas. GPs like to have the paper copy, and the poor coordinators were printing out loads of copies and taking them along. But it was easier, but it wasn't ultimately the easiest. I am pleased to say, and I met with the Public Health Wales team yesterday that have taken over the coordination of NERS. The new database that we've got, because we had a central database, but it didn't deal with a referral form. They were two separate entities. This new database will allow electronic referral direct from the health professional into the programme. And that, I think, is a real game changer for a health professional. They won't have to go back and list all of the chronic conditions and it'll all come automatically. And the participant, the referral, they will have a text message to say that it's been sent, and there'll be a text message to say that it's been received by the programme. So that was something that we wanted, Elaine, even when you were in post, and it's been a very long journey. But finally, funding was found from somewhere to develop this. It's not in operation yet, and I think, to be honest, I think it will be a couple of more months. But that is the goal. I think that is the ultimate goal, so that the coordinator can feed back to the health professional how the referral is going much easier, rather than having to go into the system, print out a letter to say Mr. Jones hasn't turned up for their appointment, and sending. It's all electronic. And that I think will be a massive turnaround, make life much easier. So that's a little bit in the future. I'd hoped it would come before I left, but it's been delayed, and it's been delayed because of COVID, really. And as well as that, there's been a massive review of NERS, because the random control trial looked at the generic programme, the level 3. This has looked at all of the programmes, and I asked yesterday if it was ready. It is ready, but it's not ready for publication yet. I'm desperate to see.
I always do.
You know that it's good. You just want to know how good it is, and I'm desperate to see it. So,
Jeannie, can I ask, because I'm really interested in, as the scheme expanded and we got more and more level 4 qualifications coming in, I know that a lot of people are really challenged with the capacity side of this, because you're not going to have an instructor. I mean, I know the qualifications have changed slightly, but you don't have and we've got this new consensus statement that says that you don't necessarily, the risks are less than people thought they were, etc. So I was just wondering, how did you manage that whole, because when we know that people are coming with multiple conditions, we know that, there are a range of conditions that people will have. There are only a limited number of instructors out there. How did you manage all of that capacity issue?
Yes. So, as you know, for me, training, knowledge, skills, and going back, CPD is really important. It's key to have someone who's really knowledgeable, and it elevates the exercise professional in the eyes of the health professional. So how we managed it is that I ensured that every area had at least one instructor that was qualified, in a level 4. And so across the sort of the range, and the instructors range from like having 3 to having 10, depending on the funding they had and whether they were full-time or part-time. So it meant that some instructors have got like 4 or 5 level 4 qualifications because they've done them over the period of time. Others might only have 2 or 3, but within the area, there is a whole mix so that all conditions are covered. So if the referral would come in and it was for a falls prevention referral, that was what the reason to come in. But we found out that the person has had a previous stroke. So the physios referred them for falls prevention because they've got a balance issue, but that was because of a stroke. So we would put them in a postural stability class, but with an instructor that holds both postural stability and exercise following stroke, so that they would be able to cater for the needs of that individual, adapting and tailoring as required. And I think this is what I mean about the social network between the instructors, to help each other, share best practice, and note taking, I think, is really important. That I'm still very old school. I like to write notes about sort of what Mrs. Jones may have done today, because when you reflect back to them at 16 weeks, it's really nice to be able to say, this is where you were at the beginning, but look where you are now. So I think it's that sharing of knowledge, of skill base, is the way that we've coped. And we have. It's fair to say that there are less referrals in some than others, stroke being one in particular. We don't have as many in stroke as I thought we would have had. And ideally, I like a cardiac qualified instructor to be there with the stroke client as well. So it's about, as you say, matching the instructor to the client, but sometimes with the support of another instructor to offer advice.
And when you did sorry, Craig.
I was just going to say, on that same point, if we looked at the opposite way round, I'm sure you would have, did you have instances where you had an individual need, be it cardiac rehab, and you didn't have an appropriately trained instructor available, where the capacity wasn't met, but it was overcome? Because the reason I pose that is the consensus statements on risk for people living with long-term health conditions and physical activity suggest or state the evidence that the benefits outweigh the risks. So that may suggest that it's okay for an individual with specific needs to go into what we might define as mainstream classes. Now, not to put words into your mouth, but the social network you mentioned, did it ever come to fruition where an instructor had somebody in their class who they weren't qualified by knowledge, but they knew they had somebody they could call if they had queries or questions? Is that how it worked, or is...
Cardiac would be a very difficult one.
Indeed, yes, that's a specific...
CPR standards.
Yeah.
It doesn't allow for us to deliver without a cardiac instructor. So for cardiac rehab, for various reasons, they would be with a cardiac rehab instructor. We have a situation in one of our areas, large geographical area, where the cardiac instructor is only based in certain areas. So that referral, the cardiac team would know that that referral has to be able to travel to one of those sites to be able to have their session. So that's one that stands alone. Some of them, if we would say, look at cancer, a cancer referral, someone who's been through their treatment maybe, and they get referred in, then for those people, dependent on the type of cancer they've had, or if there is still ongoing treatment, they would possibly be allowed to go into an appropriate class, but with the guidance of a cancer qualified instructor to guide them on what to look out for, what limitations they should consider, what safety aspects they would need to consider with that person. And I think it needs to be upfront with the client when you're doing the consultation. Yes, we can offer you sessions in this centre, but the instructor would be level 4. They might be level 4 cardiac or whatever, so they're an advanced instructor, but they would be taking advice from another instructor from another centre. So I think it's important for the person then to make up the decision themselves. Because the aim, I think, of any exercise referral program for me is to bring a patient in as a referral and actually support them to go out as a person in a mainstream class. It's the bridge from health into mainstream. I've always had this bridge, and my diagrams and my circles there, that I'm moving someone through a stream to get them into mainstream activities. That's the goal of any program that you do, really. You want someone to be independently active long term, or have the skill and knowledge to be independently active long term.
Yeah. And like we say, at the heart of it, the principle there is of supporting long-term behaviour change.
Yeah.
Elaine,
I know one of the other challenges that people have come up with is the fact that it's a capacity issue in terms of the classes. And I know that you were looking at how you would bring people together with different conditions. Can you describe a little bit more about how you managed that?
Yeah, so I had a very complicated flow chart for this. But basically, your postural stability qualification, is very in-depth, and there's a huge amount of physical activity component there that could be adapted and tailored for a number of conditions. So a lot of our stroke falls prevention we put together. Some of the respiratory group would fit into that class, because with a respiratory patient, sometimes it isn't their breathlessness that stops them. Sometimes it's the weakness in their legs. So by building up that leg strength, you can actually allow them to be more physically active. So it's about thinking about, what does this activity offer, what can it improve, and what does the person need, and matching the two together. So with our water-based classes, obviously you have those with orthopedic musculoskeletal issues would love the water activity. Also, we found, providing the pool temperature was correct, it was really good for Parkinson's patients because the water supported them. Clients with the mental health issues, stress, anxiety, loved the water-based activities. So we could bring those together quite safely. With the Parkinson's, they did tend to be at the side and really practicing their walking through the water. It was really beneficial. It was a joy to see someone walking through the water with Parkinson's, really, to be honest, to be guided. So there's a number, but it is about looking at what that activity is that physically is doing, and what activity that person actually does require. Cardiac rehab tended to be cardiac rehab because it's been there for so long and it's the standard. But sometimes we did put people from the generic program into that, because the progressive nature of cardiac rehabilitation actually suited them. So we might have generic with cardiac rehab. So there's a whole range. I mean, it is thinking about the person's needs and the activity, what it offers, and marrying the two together.
Great, thank you.
Does that make sense?
It makes absolute sense. What about the importance of flexibility within the program? Because one of the challenges with any exercise referral scheme, and I'm sure similar, is the rigidity of the program. It's a 16-week block, and it's 2 times a week, as an example. Were there elements of where you used flexibility to kind of benefit how the program ran?
Absolutely. As soon as we came out of the random control trial, because for me, as I've said before, you know, a person takes a long time, and there's various eps, you know, they could relapse and come back, and you need to accommodate that. So for me, the 16 weeks is, you know, it's as long as the person needs, really.
Yeah.
Once you've got them in the front door, that's when you can really use your skill as a instructor, this is a person just being there. And it might take someone a couple of weeks to phone you up and say, I'm ready now, can I have a start date? Now they'll do the consultation, they want to come, but they're not quite certain. And the offer there is to come and have a look, come and watch a session, see what we do, see the fun we have afterwards with a cup of tea and a biscuit. You know, it's that, or come and join in the cup of tea and a biscuit. It's getting someone through the front door is the key, and then you move them along. People do have, you know, they drop out for reasons. Respiratory patients particularly are, and for a cancer referral, if they're in the middle of their treatment, then they take blocks out for their treatment. Respiratory patients, particularly through the winter months, get lots of infections, and they can't come, and it's almost like a step back for them before they can move forward. But move forward they do, and I think it's giving someone the time, and it was very much something to make the commissioners understand. No, it's not a 16-week. It's 16 weeks, but it's for however long that person needs.
You used the word treatment before in relation to cancer, for example, and that's a brilliant way, I believe, to look at this. So in terms of that synergy and that merger between health and physical activity can form part of, and is part of, an individual's treatment plan. And it's just like if you're on medication, you need to take 2 per day or whatever it would be of something. If you don't take the medication, it's not doing the thing that you want it to do.
Absolutely.
If you're not attending or taking part in the physical activity session as part of your treatment, then you need to still complete the course, i.e. you've got to take 16 doses, we might say. So that's brilliant to hear and know that flexibility is in there, because where we want to come to kind of not rush and close conversations necessarily, but for those that are watching and listening, if they're thinking of devising a form of an exercise referral or physical activity referral program, through all the brilliant examples and experience that you've had, Jeannie, what are those big fundamental blocks that they make sure, for fear of wrath of Jeannie Wyatt-Williams, they've got in it, otherwise you're coming knocking? What are those big bits?
Well, I think they need to have a clear idea of what it is they want to offer.
Yeah.
You know, what is their cost going to be? They need to have a clear understanding of what the limitations of, you know, their boundaries of what they're able to deliver. And ideally, they need to have a link with a health professional or a multidisciplinary team, whichever type of referral they're looking to start up. And gather some evidence of what some of the outcomes of their, you know, if they've had participants before. It's really difficult if you've never done anything. So even if it's volunteering initially to, so you gather some evidence of something you've done, because health professionals they need to believe in what you're offering them. So I think having a passion, and Elaine knows how much passionately I talk about my referrals, which now are a very long time ago, but I still think of them. And, being passionate about what you do, that comes across when you're talking to a health professional. And that's what they're looking for. They're looking for someone who, one, has the skill and knowledge, but two, has a passion about what they're delivering, that is able to reach out to their patients and will offer their patients a safe journey. And I think, for me, that's the fundamental, is just being passionate about what you do and gather as much knowledge and skill as you can. Anything that you can, any funding you can find for training, then train and do that. Yeah. I think that's the nugget. There's so many nuggets. And I think if you do start, then it's very keen to keep data. Keep a pre and a post set of data. You will need that if you want to expand and move on. And the key is, if you don't write it down, it didn't happen.
There are many up-to-date examples of that as well, Strava and things like that included. If it's not on there, it might as well not have happened.
No, if it's not done, if it's not recorded, if it's not written down, it hasn't happened.
Yeah, that's very true. Very, very true. So in relation to lessons learned around exercise referral, one thing that's really standing out to me in this conversation, it's been in my mind since you mentioned it right at the beginning, really, is there are elements within there that are still hyper relevant, was the phrase I used before, in today. It's not a case of, and like I say, the elephant in the room around exercise referral is that it's an older way of doing things and the world has moved on. It's not, don't do that anymore, do something completely new. It's an evolution of.
Yes. And
there are some examples that are brilliantly placed, because there is, for my money, and this is opinion based and there is some evidence, but I can't remember or reference where it is. Elaine, that's your skill, being able to go, it's in that report. But there is always a place for a need, for a mechanism or a pathway to get an individual with need to the right place at the right time, and for that to be delivered in the right way. And I've had a background in exercise referral when I came through the system, as we call it, as a fitness instructor and a personal trainer, and it works. It's a brilliant process to go through. And that innovation you mentioned earlier, Jeannie, in terms of you managed to get the funding for something as small as what might seem superficial, a text message to be sent to the individual. Those behavioural nudge characteristics within the designer programs make such an important impact on somebody's transition from, if it is, inactive to active. Absolutely. Knowing that somebody is looking after you and caring for you and guiding you on that pathway is invaluable. I'm coming from a biased position because this is my area of work and passion. So, but yeah, it's brilliant. It's been brilliant to listen to your story and the things that you've achieved through NERS. And Elaine, not forgetting you, because you worked on this program as well. We've spoken about it many times before, haven't we?
Yeah. I mean, it's one of the things that you look back on your career, and it's one of the things I'm most proud of, is the work that Jeannie and I did and getting up off the ground, getting it going, and then obviously it's continuing today. And the learning curve from that whole process was absolutely massive. It was, and it has stood me in good stead for things we've gone on to. And I mean, even things like, I got invited to sit on a NICE committee looking at the whole standards and where they went, and then the toolkit and various other things, because this is about sharing knowledge. It's about people are grappling with these issues. How do we get people active? How do we support people into activity? And as you say, the devil's sometime in the detail. It's these little things that can have a huge impact at the end of it. And that was what we were trying to learn from the trial. That's what we hope, well, as Jeannie's said, that's what she built upon, because I finished in that position not long after the trial, and we were beginning to make those changes at that point, because it was about learning from what we'd been through, and it was about trying to make everything better, make the experience better for the client or patient, and continue to do that. So these little things all add up to something bigger. I'm sure there's a term for that. Synergistic, is it? Something like that.
we can arguably make things unnecessarily complicated for the fact of it. And I'll before I kind of wrap things up for today, I guess, one of the first things that you said at the start of this episode, Jeannie, was about when you were adding, what did you do differently? I think was the question that Elaine posed. And it was quite simply speaking to the medical professional, the GP, what is it you're doing to our patients? There's no, here's the evidence and the randomized control trial. Come down and have a look.
Yeah.
Come and have a look.
Yes.
So that human connection of just make the evidence, or whatever it is in form of evidence, just real. It doesn't need to always be big fancy evaluations of. It can be just as powerful if it is, here's a picture of a person, or here is that person that you can speak to. So don't over egg it unnecessarily. But if you do have the ability, do a randomized control trial. Why not?
Well, maybe not. I've got grey hair still from that.
I don't think I'd ever want to do another random control trial, as much as I really, loved the results, and it enabled me to go on and make it grow into what it is now. I don't think I'd ever want to do another one.
It's challenging. I take my hat off to, it was Cardiff University who supported us with it, and fair play to them. We had to go through a lot of reiterations of how we were going to make it work, and they were so accommodating, and we managed to make it to work in the end. But real challenging thing to do.
The word you used at the beginning was interesting. So I hope everybody has found this conversation both interesting and insightful. So Jeannie, thank you again for joining us on this episode of Network Insights. For those that are new to the series, as mentioned before, if you would like to see other episodes in the series, you can head to the Move Consulting website. That's moveconsulting.co.uk/network-insights. But apart from that, we will call it for today's conversation. So Jeannie, thank you very much for joining us today, and we will see you again next month. Bye everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.